The woman who carried her father's secrets all the way to Texas, and the broken man who had been waiting for her. If you've ever carried a grief so heavy, it changed the way you walk. Stay with me. This story is for you. Like and subscribe so you never miss what comes next, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this reaches. The calf had been dead since morning. Colt Mercer had known it before he touched it, known it the way a man who has lived long enough alone comes to know things, not by evidence, but by the particular quality of stillness that settles over something when it is no longer trying. He had finished his supper anyway, washed his plate, hung his coat on the peg by the door, and then walked out into the night with a shovel, because there was nothing else to be done, and a man who let things lie where they fell was a man who had given up. The Texas sky above him was enormous and starless. A weather front was moving in from the north, low and gray, eating the constellations one by one. The wind had a bite to it. October had come early this year. He could smell it, the cold, the wet, the particular scent of approaching change that the grassland gave off when the season was turning. He chose a spot near the old cottonwood at the edge of the south pasture, far enough from the water tank that the ground would not go muddy in the spring thaw. He drove the blade in and began. This was what Colt Mercer did when he could not sleep. He dug. He had dug fence post holes and drainage ditches and a new well and a root cellar and half a dozen graves for dogs, for cattle, for a horse he had owned for 11 years, and wept over more than he had wept over most people. The repetition of it settled something in him, the steady resistance of the earth, the way his arms knew what to do without being told. He did not have to think. He only had to work. He was 3 feet down when he heard it. Not the crack of a branch he had learned to distinguish between the sounds of the dark. Not the bark of a coyote or the rustle of some small night creature moving through the sage. This was heavier, a stumble, the particular percussion of a human body meeting the ground without preparation. Colt stopped digging. He stood perfectly still in the dark, his hands on the shovel handle, his head tilted. 30 yards, he estimated. Maybe 35. Coming from the direction of the dry creek bed that ran along the eastern boundary of his land. He set the shovel against the cottonwood and reached for the revolver at his hip, old habit deep as breathing, and moved toward the sound. He almost missed her. She was in the creek bed, half covered by the shadow of the bank, her dark hair spread across the pale sand, like something spilled. For a moment he thought she was dead, the same thought he had had about the calf, and felt the same quiet knowledge settle in his gut, but then she moved, one hand slow and uncoordinated, reaching for nothing. A reflex of survival. She was not dead, but she was not far from it. He knelt beside her. She was young, mid-20s maybe, and she had been through something. Her dress was torn at both shoulders, the hem ragged and stained with what looked like dried blood from a dozen small wounds. Her feet were bare and cut, one ankle turned at an angle that made him wince. Her wrists showed the marks of restraints, the skin rubbed raw in the distinct pattern he had seen before. He had seen it in his old life, the life before the ranch, the life he did not speak about. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck. Her pulse was there, rapid thread-like, but present. "All right," he said quietly to no one in particular. "All right." He was careful when he lifted her. She was lighter than she should have been. She had not eaten in some time. She stirred when he picked her up, made a sound that was half word and half animal panic, and her hands came up instinctively to push at him. "Easy," he said. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." She did not believe him. He could feel it in the way every muscle in her body held itself taut, braced even through her near unconsciousness. She had learned in the last however many hours that the world was a place where men hurt you. He did not try to argue with what she had learned. He just carried her. The ranch house was a 20-minute walk, and he covered it steadily, not rushing, letting the horse follow loose at his side. The dog, a cattle dog named Rex, met him at the gate and fell in silently beside him, reading the situation with the intelligence dogs have when they have lived long enough around a person to understand his moods. Inside, Colt laid her on the bed in the spare room, the room that had been his parents' room, that he had rebuilt after the fire that took them, that he kept clean out of some habit of respect he could not fully articulate, and lit the lamp on the small table, and looked at her properly for the first time. Her face in repose was younger than her circumstances. Whatever had happened to her had not yet finished happening in her expression, and he understood this because he had seen it before, the way trauma lives, in a face even in sleep, the tightness around the eyes and mouth, that is the body, still bracing for the next blow, even when the immediate danger has passed. She had dark hair that had come loose from its pins, and a quality about her jaw that suggested stubbornness which he noted without judgment. Stubborn people survived things. He had found that to be generally true. He cleaned and wrapped her feet and her wrists, working carefully and without haste. Her hands, even unconscious, tried once to pull away from his, and he held them gently and steadily until the impulse passed. He had done this before, sat with people in the aftermath of violence, and tried to communicate through contact what words could not reach the simple message that the immediate danger was over, that the next thing that happened would not be harm. It was a skill he had developed in his old work and never entirely set aside. He was not sure whether to be glad or sorry that it was still useful. He covered her with the spare blanket. He left a tin cup of water on the floor inside the door. Then he went back outside in the dark and finished burying the calf. He worked more slowly than he had before, and when the grave was filled and tamped, he stood with his hands on the shovel handle and looked at the sky for a while. The weather front had moved through. The stars were coming out now, clear and sharp and cold, more stars than anyone from a city ever believed until they saw them. He had found people in bad circumstances before. It was part of what the work had required of him, riding out to scenes that were already over, piecing together what had happened from what remained, carrying the knowledge of it, and trying to turn it into something useful. He had found people in worse shape than the woman in his spare room. He had not always been in time to find them alive. He went inside and washed his hands at the kitchen pump and looked at the closed door of the spare room for a moment. Then he banked the fire and went to bed and lay in the dark and listened to the wind and did not sleep much. She woke in a room she did not recognize. The ceiling was bare wood. The morning light that came through the single small window was pale and flat, the particular gray-white of overcast October sky. She lay still for a long moment before she let herself breathe, fully assessing the way she had learned to assess in 3 days of captivity before she had understood that assessment could be the difference between what happened next and what did not. She was on a bed, a real bed with a mattress beneath her, and a blanket over her wool slightly rough against her chin. Her feet had been wrapped in clean cloth, her wrists too. Someone had washed the blood from them. There was a steady tapping sound from somewhere outside the room, a hammer unhurried. A dog barked once and went quiet. Cattle lowing in the distance. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a working place. On the floor just inside the door, which was ajar, perhaps 2 inches, sat a tin cup. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she got up. Everything hurt, a full inventory of damage that she had not been able to take during the flight. But she moved to the door and opened it another foot and reached down for the cup. Coffee. It had gone cold, but it was real coffee, dark and strong, and the smell of it alone did something to the constriction in her chest. She drank it, standing in the doorway, looking out at the main room of a house she had never seen. It was plain. A table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, a shelf of books above the mantel, more books than she expected from the outside of the place. A coat rack by the front door with 1 coat on it. A gun belt hanging beside the coat. An old rug in faded blues and reds, worn thin along the paths between furniture. A man's space ordered and functional, with no decoration beyond the books and a single framed photograph on the mantel. There was no man. She did not drink the rest of the coffee immediately. She held it. She looked at the room and the gun belt and the books, and she tried to understand where she was and whether she was safe or only in a different kind of danger. Her name was Alara Voss. She was 27 years old. She had been a teacher in Philadelphia for 4 years, in the school her parents had run before they died. Her father had died in a fire 18 months after her mother. A church fire ruled accidental case closed. She had not believed it was accidental and had not been able to prove otherwise, and had eventually done the only thing left to do, which was leave. She had come west with a trunk full of books, and one other thing, a journal leather-bound. The clasp tarnished her father's handwriting on every page. She had not read all of it. She had started it twice, and stopped both times in the last quarter, where the handwriting changed character, became more careful and oblique, and she had understood without fully admitting it that she was afraid of what she would find there. She had not been afraid of many things before the past 4 days. She was afraid of a number of things now. The trunk was gone. The stage was gone. The driver, a taciturn man named Pike who had not said 10 words to her in 2 days, she did not know about whether he was dead or had simply run. The men who had surrounded the stage in the early dark of the 3rd morning had not seemed concerned with Pike one way or another. Their concern had been with her, with the fact that she was the daughter of a man named Joseph Voss, and with whatever they believed she knew or carried. She carried the journal still. She had tucked it inside her dress when she escaped, and she had run with it pressed against her sternum, and she still had it now slightly creased from the running. It was the only thing she had left. She was looking at the photograph on the mantel, trying to make out the faces in it, when the front door opened. He was taller than she had registered in the dark, several inches over 6 feet lean, in the way that hard work makes a man lean, rather than the way neglect does. He wore a canvas work jacket over a faded shirt, his dark hair slightly damp at the temples, despite the cold outside. He was carrying a second tin cup, and he stopped when he saw her standing in the doorway to the bedroom, alive and upright, and something shifted in his face that she could not entirely read. Not surprise, not quite relief, something more careful than either. "You're up," he said. "Yes. Coffee's from this morning. There's a fresh pot on." She looked down at the cup in her hand. This was cold. It was still good. He nodded as though this were a reasonable thing to say about cold coffee, and moved past her to set his own cup on the table and hang his jacket on the rack. He moved economically without wasted motion, a man who had lived alone a long time. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly. "You shouldn't be on those feet. They're wrapped. They're wrapped, and they still shouldn't be walked on." He pulled out one of the chairs at the table with his boot and looked at her steadily until she sat. His eyes were dark, a brown so deep it read almost black in the flat morning light, and they did not waver when they looked at you. She had noticed this in the creek bed, half-conscious, when she had tried to push him away, and he had said easy in that low voice. His eyes had not flinched. She was not sure yet whether that was reassuring or something else entirely. He brought her fresh coffee. He brought bread and a small amount of salt pork that had been warming near the fire, and he set it in front of her without ceremony or comment, and went back to stand at the fireplace looking into the coals. She ate. She did not want to eat, her stomach had been closed and suspicious for 3 days. But she made herself small, methodical bites, because she understood in some animal way that she needed to. He did not watch her. He looked at the fire. "Where are we?" she said when she had gotten through half the bread. "My ranch, the Broken Spur, about 40 miles northwest of Harlan Falls." She absorbed this. "How did you find me?" "I was digging." A pause. "Heard you fall." "What were you digging at that hour?" A brief silence. "A grave. For a calf." He turned to look at her then. "You want to tell me what happened? Or do you want to sit a while first? She looked at her hands around the tin cup. Her knuckles were scraped. There was still a thin line of dark beneath each fingernail that was not dirt. "The Harlan Creed gang," she said. "They took my stage 2 days out of Dallas. There were 7 of them." Something changed in his expression. Subtle the way a man's jaw sets when he hears a name he has been waiting to hear for a long time and has not been looking forward to. "How long did they hold you?" 3 days. "How did you get out?" She hesitated. She had not yet decided what to say about Wesley. She did not know enough about this man Colt Mercer. He had told her his name in the creek bed, and she had filed it away, even in her haze, to know whether Wesley would be safe here. "I found a way," she said. He looked at her for a moment. He did not press it. "They'll be looking for you," he said. "I know. Creed doesn't let things go." She looked up. "You know him?" "I know of him." His voice was flat and closed. "Stay put. I need to go see my neighbor." "Who is your neighbor?" "May Hollis. 4 miles east. She knows this territory better than anyone." He picked up his hat from the rack. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." He left. She heard him saddle a horse in the barn, heard the hoofbeats diminish to the east. Then the ranch was quiet, except for the wind and the cattle and the steady, neutral sounds of an ordinary working morning. She explored the house, not out of nosiness or not entirely, out of the need to understand where she was, to build a map of the place, to know the exits and the windows and the thickness of the walls. These were new instincts, and she was not yet comfortable with them, but she did not ignore them. The house was small. Main room, 2 bedrooms, a lean-to kitchen at the back, with a hand pump and a wood stove. One bedroom was clearly his, a narrow bed made with military precision, a trunk at the foot of it, a shaving kit on the small table beside the window. The room she had been put in had only a narrow shelf on the wall, bearing a stack of old almanacs, and a woman's hand mirror tarnished around the edges. His mother's things, she thought. Someone he had kept them for. The books above the fireplace were what she kept returning to. There were perhaps 30 of them, a miscellany, a surveying manual, a worn Bible, a collection of Tennyson, several volumes of legal text, something called Criminal Investigation, a practical textbook that was annotated in pencil throughout. She pulled this last one from the shelf and opened it, and found the same handwriting on the flyleaf that she recognized from the margin notes. C. Mercer, Dallas, 1878. She put the book back carefully, exactly as she had found it. Near the door, half hidden behind the coat rack, there was a stack of newspapers, Dallas papers several years old. She lifted the top one and found it folded open to an interior page, an article circled in pencil. Gang activity in Hill Country escalates. Creed suspected in stage robberies. The next paper also folded to an interior page. Dallas office declines to comment on investigation into Creed network. The next. She unfolded it and smoothed it on the table and read, and then her hands went very still. The headline was small below the fold, a brief paragraph. A man's name. Joseph Voss, formerly of the Congregation of St. Andrews, Philadelphia. A fire of undetermined origin. No surviving family. Case closed. No surviving family. She was his only family, and no one had thought to find her. She had been a week out of Philadelphia when it happened already on the train west, and the news had caught up with her 6 weeks later through a letter forwarded through 3 addresses. By then the case was closed, the investigation finished, and her father was 3 months in the ground. She looked at the next paper in the stack, and then she stopped entirely, because below the fold, in a small article about the closure of a Dallas detective agency, was a sentence that rearranged everything she thought she knew about where she was and who had carried her out of a creek bed the night before. Among the agents whose contracts have been terminated is C. Mercer, formerly lead investigator on several high-profile cases. Mercer declined to comment on the agency's decision or on the status of pending investigations including the long-running inquiry into the activities of Harlan Creed and Associates. C. Mercer, Dallas, the same name on the flyleaf of the book on the shelf. She put the newspaper back exactly as she had found it. She went back to the table and sat down and looked at her hands for a long time without moving, and she thought about cold coffee on a doorstep and the careful way someone had wrapped her wrists, and she tried to understand what it meant that the man who had been investigating her father's killers was the same man who had found her in the dark. May Hollis arrived before Colt did. She came on a gray mare, moving at a quick trot, the pace of a woman who understood the difference between urgency and panic. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, broad-shouldered, and deliberate in her movements with gray, threaded through dark hair, she wore pinned under a battered hat. Her face was deeply weathered, and her eyes were the particular sharp dark of someone who had learned to watch everything and miss nothing. She knocked once, and came in without waiting for an answer, which Alara found oddly reassuring. "You're the woman Colt found," she said. Not a question. Alara Voss. Yes. Sir May Hollis looked her over with the frank assessment of someone who was not going to pretend to be polite about it. She looked at the wrapped wrists and the wrapped feet and the torn dress, and then at Alara's face, and whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. "I've got clothes that'll fit you better than that," she said, "and I've got news that won't." She hung her own hat on the rack and sat down across from Alara as though she owned the place. "3 riders came through my land at dawn, moving fast, heading northeast. 2 men I didn't know, and 1 I did Wesley Creed Harlan's nephew. Boy can't be more than 17. Alara went very still. "I know that name," May said, watching her. "And I think you do too." Alara looked at the table. "He helped me get out. Helped you, or let you go. Both, neither." She pressed her lips together. "He ran when I ran. He's been following me since." May absorbed this without visible reaction. "You know what that makes him. A 17-year-old boy who made a choice," Alara said, "and who is probably more afraid right now than I am." A silence. May tipped her head slightly, acknowledging something. "Colt's going to want to know." "I know. He won't hurt the boy. That's not who he is." She paused. "But he'll want the whole truth. Colt Mercer is many things, and most of them are difficult, but he's never been a man who can work with half a picture." Alara looked up at her. "How long have you known him?" 6 years, since he bought this place." May's expression settled into something more considered. "He came here from Dallas. He doesn't talk about Dallas, but things from Dallas have a way of following a man regardless." She held Alara's gaze steadily. "Is that what you are? Something from Dallas." Alara thought of the newspaper she had put back exactly as she found it. She thought of the annotated book on the shelf. She thought of her father, 3 years in the ground, and the letter that had told her the case was closed, and no one was looking anymore. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. May Hollis nodded slowly, as though this were the most sensible answer she had heard in some time. She had brought them in a canvas bag tied to her saddle, a plain work dress in dark blue wool, a cotton undershirt, stockings, and a pair of boots that fit Alara only approximately but well enough. She also produced from deeper in the bag a bar of good soap, a small pot of salve for the chafed skin on Alara's wrists, and a wrapped parcel that turned out to be cornbread, still faintly warm from the morning. "Eat that," May said, setting it on the table. While Alara changed in the bedroom, May waited in the kitchen, and when Alara came back out, May looked her over. The way she had looked her over before, completely without apology, and said, "Better," which Alara understood was not about the dress. "Thank you," Alara said, "for coming." May waved this off. "Texas doesn't ask where you came from," she said. "Texas only asks if you can endure." She poured herself more coffee without asking. "The answer in your case appears to be yes, which means you belong here as much as anyone." Elara sat down and ate the cornbread. May sat across from her and drank a cup of coffee she had helped herself to from the pot on the stove, and looked at Elara the way she seemed to look at most things completely, without any particular self-consciousness about the looking. "You're not what I expected," May said after a while. "What did you expect?" "Colt finds things in bad shape. Animals mostly. He tends them, and they either recover or they don't, and he doesn't make much fuss either way." She turned her cup between her palms. "He's never brought home a person before." "He didn't exactly bring me home," Elara said. "He found me in a creek bed." "Same thing to his mind." May looked at her steadily. "He doesn't do things without reason. He doesn't pick up strays out of sentiment. He has a different threshold for it than most people. When he decides something is worth tending, it's because he's assessed the situation and made a judgment." A pause. "I'm telling you this so you understand that you're not here by accident. Whatever he tells himself about just doing the right thing." Elara was quiet for a moment. She looked at the closed door of the spare room which she had come out of an hour ago, and which now felt strangely significant, a marker of something she could not yet name. "He knew my father," she said. Not a question this time. "I gathered," May said, "when you said the Creed gang. It's more complicated than that. Most things worth anything are." May stood and collected the cups and rinsed them at the pump with the brisk efficiency of a woman who did not see the point in letting the small practical tasks pile up. "Tell me what you want to tell me and leave out what you don't. I'll work with whatever you give me." This, Elara thought, was exactly the right thing to say. She told May what she knew and what she suspected, leaving out the newspapers that felt like something that should be addressed directly with Colt, and May listened without interrupting. When Elara was done, May was quiet for a moment, her hand still at the pump. "All right," she said finally. "Let's start with the clothes." Elara almost laughed because May had already said that, and May noticed her almost laugh, and something shifted briefly in her weathered face that might have been amusement. "We start with the practical," May said. "Always. The complicated things don't go anywhere while you're finding dry socks. But a person can't think clearly when they're cold and uncomfortable, and clear thinking is what you're going to need." And this, Elara decided, was the most useful piece of advice anyone had given her in months. Wesley was in the tack room. Colt found him when he came back from May's. Not the boy himself at first, but the evidence of him, a thin trail of blood on the side of the barn that someone had tried to wipe away without complete success, and the latch on the tack room door pushed up from the inside. Colt stood outside the door for a moment, then spoke at normal volume. "I know you're in there," he said, "and I'm not going to shoot you through the door, but I'd like you to come out." A long pause. Then the latch lifted. The boy was 17, maybe, with a look about him that Colt recognized not in the specific, but in the general, the look of someone who has been afraid for so long, it has become the only expression their face knows how to make. He was lean and dark, and had a cut on his forearm that he had bound badly with a strip torn from his own shirt. He held himself with the particular combination of defiance and exhaustion that comes when a person has decided they are past caring what happens to them, but their body has not quite agreed. He looked at the revolver on Colt's hip. "I'm not reaching for it," Colt said. The boy said nothing. "You're Wesley Creed." Still nothing, but his jaw moved. "You helped the woman get out," Colt said. Not a question. "You've been following her since." "She can't make it alone out here," the boy said. His voice was rough from disuse or fear or both. "She doesn't know the land." "No," Colt agreed. "She doesn't." He studied the boy for a moment. "Your uncle is looking for you." "I know. He'll come here eventually." "I know that too." Colt looked at the badly bound arm. "Come inside," he said. "Let me look at that." She saw them come in together, the tall man and the boy, and she did not say anything immediately. She stood in the doorway to the kitchen with May Hollis beside her and watched the boy look at her, and she watched what happened in his face. He had not expected to see her standing up. She could tell that much. "Wesley," she said. "Miss Voss." His voice was careful, the way voices get when a person is trying to hold several things at once. Colt looked between them. "You two know each other." "He helped me," Elara said. "I told May." She kept her eyes on Wesley. "I didn't tell her everything." The boy went still. "Sit down," she said the way she had said it to students who were afraid to say what they knew. Not unkind, just clear. "We're past the point where any of us can afford to hold things back." Wesley looked at Colt. "She's right," Colt said. The boy sat. What came out of him then was not a confession exactly. It had more the quality of something that had been under pressure for a very long time and had finally found a crack to move through. He talked about his uncle, about the way Harlan Creed operated, not just the stage robberies and the cattle theft, and the visible violences that the law could track, but the other things, the things that moved underground. The names he had heard in low voices. The men who came to camp from cities from Dallas and San Antonio and once from St. Louis. Men who wore good suits and paid Creed in coin and left with things that were not goods and not cattle. He talked about a name that had come up 3 years ago, a name that had made Creed go quiet in the particular way he went quiet when he was calculating something. A name from Philadelphia, a man who had been asking questions he should not have been asking through channels that should not have known each other. He said the name. Elara heard it and did not move. Joseph Voss. "Your uncle had him killed," she said. Her voice was very even. "I don't know if he gave the order himself," Wesley said, looking at his hands. "I know the fire was not an accident. I know the man who did it worked for Creed. I know—" He stopped. He reached into his shirt and withdrew something, a small notebook, the cover worn slick with handling, and set it on the table between them. "I know because I took this before they burned the rest." Colt picked it up. He opened it and looked at the first page, and something happened in his face that Elara had not seen there before, a kind of recognition, sudden and complicated, like a man who has walked into a room he has been looking for and is not sure he wants to be inside. He looked up at her. She looked back at him. "You know what this is," she said. Not a question. He set the book down. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know what this is." May Hollis left in the early afternoon after making it clear that she expected to be informed of developments and intended to be useful whether anyone asked her to or not. Colt walked her to her horse, and they spoke for a few minutes out of Elara's hearing, and when he came back inside, his expression had settled into something she was beginning to recognize. Not closed exactly, but considered. The face of a man running through contingencies. Wesley had fallen asleep at the table. Colt looked at him for a moment. The boy's head on his folded arms, his breathing slow and even, the cut on his forearm still showing through the bandage, and then looked at Elara. "He's been awake since before you escaped," he said quietly. "Probably hasn't eaten much either." "He saved my life," she said. "I know." He pulled the second chair out and sat down across from her, and he put the small notebook on the table between them. And he looked at it, rather than at her. "This notebook. Your father collected names, routes, money amounts. He had been at it for close to 2 years, based on the entries. He was giving the information to someone." Colt was quiet. "To a detective," she said. "In Dallas. A man named Mercer." He looked up at her then. She held his gaze. "I found the newspapers by the door. I wasn't looking for them. I wasn't trying to find anything." She took a breath. "Was he working for you?" Colt set his elbows on the table. He pressed his hands together in front of his mouth and looked at the notebook for a long moment. Then he said, He volunteered. I want you to understand that first. I didn't recruit him. He came to me. He looked up. He had been at a church conference in Dallas. He had heard Creed's name in a context that alarmed him through a parishioner, someone who had been hurt. He came to the agency and told us what he knew and asked what he could do. I told him to go home. I told him to forget about it. He came back 3 weeks later with the first 6 pages of that notebook. She looked at the notebook on the table between them. I should have shut it down, Colt said. His voice was even. She was already learning that evenness from him. It was not coldness. It was the sound of a man exercising control over something that wanted very much to get out. When it started to get dangerous, when Creed's people began asking questions about Philadelphia that they should not have known to ask, I should have pulled him out. But you didn't. I didn't. A pause. I told myself we were too close, that we needed another few months, that the information he was building was going to break something open that could not be broken any other way. He stopped. And then, the fire happened. Elara looked at her father's journal still inside her dress pressed against her ribs. She had not taken it out. She had not read the last pages. She had been afraid of them for a long time. He knew the risk, she said carefully. That doesn't make it all right. No, she agreed. It doesn't. But it means the choice was his. He looked at her for a long moment. You don't know that yet. I know my father. Her voice was steady. He was not a man who was led into things. He was a man who decided. She paused. I just don't know yet exactly what he decided, or why, or what he left behind that was meant to be found. Colt was quiet. Outside the wind had picked up, moving against the house with a low, steady pressure. The clock on the mantel ticked. You haven't read all of it, he said. He was looking at the shape of the journal beneath her dress. The journal. No. Are you going to? She looked down at her hands. When I'm ready. He did not push it. He stood and picked up the notebook and went to stand at the window, looking out at the gray afternoon. Wesley stirred, but did not wake. Creed will come here, Colt said. Not today. Maybe not for a few days. He doesn't move without a plan, and he has been caught off guard. He wasn't expecting the boy to run, or you to get out. He paused. But he'll come. How many men does he have? 12 last I heard. Could be more. She absorbed this. What do we do? He turned from the window. His face was tired, not weary, but tired the way faces get when a person has been carrying something for a very long time and has only recently allowed themselves to feel the full weight of it. We get ready, he said. The first 5 days at the Broken Spur passed in a particular quality of waiting. She learned the shape of the days here, the early dark rising, the fire built before dawn. The coffee that Colt made strong and black without asking how she took it, which was the same way. So this was not a problem. The cattle needed tending. With only one full-time ranch hand, a quiet man named Ira, who lived in the bunkhouse and had been told only that there was a guest, there was always something to be done. Colt worked from first light until well after dark without complaint or comment. He expected the same from himself that the land expected, and asked nothing more. Elara worked alongside him. She did not know cattle. She said so on the first morning standing in the barn door watching him saddle his horse, and he looked at her with that level dark gaze and said, There's fence line on the south side that needs walking. You look for breaks or rust or posts that have worked loose, and you mark them with a strip of rag from that box on the wall. He handed her a box of torn cloth strips. You don't have to know cattle to walk fence. She walked fence. She walked it all the way to the southern boundary and back 2 miles each way, and the work was simple enough that her mind could move while her feet moved. The land was not beautiful in any way she had been prepared for, not the green rolling beauty of Pennsylvania or the dramatic coastal scenery she had read about in books. It was flat and brown and enormous, the sky above it so wide it seemed to lean down toward the earth, and the grass moved in the wind with a sound like distant water. She had expected to find it bleak. She found instead that it asked something of her, a kind of attention, a willingness to look without the filter of expectation, and that when she gave it that attention, there was something underneath the bleakness that she did not have a word for yet. She marked 3 broken posts and 2 sections of rusted wire and carried the information back to Colt at the end of the afternoon, and he listened to her report with the same focused attention he gave everything and said, "Good," and went to get the tools. She followed him. He did not tell her to stay behind. They worked on the fence together until the light went. He showed her how to set a post properly, the angle of it, the tamping of the earth, the test pull, to check the depth, and she learned and did not ask him to repeat himself. He noticed this, she thought. He noticed most things. The second day, he showed her how to work the hand pump in the kitchen without flooding the floor, and how to bank a fire so it would hold through the night, and where the spare lamp oil was kept, and a dozen other small pieces of knowledge that were the vocabulary of living in a place. She stored each one carefully. She had come west to build a life, and a life was made of exactly this, of small competencies of knowing where things were, of understanding how a particular place worked, and how to work within it. The third day, May Hollis arrived with a basket of practical supplies and a second basket of opinions, and she and Alara mended the back porch railing that had rotted through, while May offered commentary on every subject that came up and some that did not. May had a quality that Alara recognized and valued, the quality of a person who had decided long ago that honesty was more useful than tact and had never seen reason to revise that decision. She spoke about Colt with the directness of long familiarity. He was different before, May said, not quite looking at Alara, her hands busy with the wood and the nails. When he first came here, not he was always quiet. That's not what I mean. But there was a weight on him then that was different from the weight he carries now. What changed? Alara asked. Time, May said. Work. The land. A pause. He stopped waiting to be punished for whatever he thought he'd done. She glanced up. Mostly. Alara looked at the hammer in her hand. He blames himself, she said. For my father. He blames himself for everything that happens within a 50-mile radius, May said without particular rancor, as though this were simply a fact of geography, like the direction the wind blew. It's his most significant flaw, and also in some lights his most admirable quality. Depends on the day. She drove a nail home with 3 clean strokes and moved to the next section of railing without waiting for a response. The 4th day, Alara helped Ira move cattle from the south pasture to the north one on horseback she had ridden before as a girl, and her body remembered even if she was slow, and her legs ached badly afterward. Colt rode alongside her for part of it, not instructing, just present, and she noticed that he rode the way he did most things, with an economy of movement that was almost aesthetic, as though he had long ago stripped away everything unnecessary and kept only what worked. She thought about what that cost a person, the stripping away, whether you could do it deliberately, or whether it only happened when the unnecessary things were taken from you by circumstance, and whether the end result was the same. Either way, this lean, functional, quietly capable man, who forgot sometimes, she thought that there were things beyond function worth having. Or perhaps he had not forgotten. Perhaps he had only decided the forgetting was safer. The 5th day she stood in the yard in the cold morning and fired Colt's spare revolver at a fence post until her shoulder ached and her aim had stopped being entirely a matter of hope. Colt had shown her the mechanics of it the evening before the loading. The weight of the hammer, the difference between pulling and squeezing the trigger, the way the recoil would move through her arm if she let it, and what to do instead. He had stood behind her while she practiced the stance, and she had been acutely aware of him, of the proximity of the warmth of him against the cold morning air, and she had made herself focus on the gun and not on the man, because one of those things could keep her alive, and the other one was a different kind of dangerous entirely. "Better," he had said when she finally put 3 shots in a reasonable grouping near the center of the post. He said it the way he said most things, without excess, without performance. But there was something in it that landed differently than a simple assessment. She had filed it away, along with the other things she was filing away, the growing collection of small observations she was not yet sure what to do with. She did not ask Colt about Dallas. She did not ask him about her father. She was not ready for the answers yet, and something in the careful distance he maintained told her he understood that he would not push before she was ready to receive. Wesley had been given a cot in the tack room. By his own preference, he seemed to favor the barn, to the house, the animals, to the people, and Colt let him make that choice without comment. In the evenings, he would come in for the meal and sit quietly at the far end of the table, eating with a focused economy that suggested he was not entirely accustomed to regular food. Elara watched him sometimes from the corner of her eye. She thought about what it meant to grow up alongside violence, to have cruelty as the weather of your childhood, the ordinary condition of your days. She thought about what it meant to choose at 17, at the cost of everything familiar, to do differently. She thought there was a particular kind of courage in that, not the dramatic courage of a single decisive moment, but the quieter, harder courage of a long series of small refusals, each one a restatement of who you were, determined to become. She recognized that courage because she had been trying to practice her own version of it for 3 years. She thought about her own father, about what he had chosen, about the fact that she still did not know the whole of it, and that the journal was waiting in the inside pocket of her coat, and that she was going to have to read it soon, because she could feel the weight of the unread pages like a physical thing, like something pressing against a closed door. On the 5th night, she took out the journal. She lit the lamp in the small room and pulled the quilt around her shoulders and opened it to the last quarter, the pages she had not read. The handwriting was her father's compact, and even the hand of a man who had been trained in penmanship and still believed it mattered. The entries from the last 6 months were different from the earlier ones, more careful, more oblique. He had begun to write in a kind of code, not sophisticated, just the habitual caution of a man who had realized he was being watched more closely than he had anticipated. He wrote about his work without naming what the work was. He wrote about a contact without naming who the contact was. He wrote about a document he was compiling, about the routes by which it might safely travel, about the people who might ultimately receive it. He wrote about her. She read those passages twice. He had written about her, the way he had always spoken about her, with a particular combination of pride and bemused exasperation, as though she perpetually exceeded his expectations, and also perpetually surprised him by the specific way in which she did it. He wrote that she had her mother's courage and his stubbornness, and that he was not sure which would serve her better. He wrote that he hoped she found the frontier as full of possibility as she believed it to be, and that he was sorry he would not be there to hear about it. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before the fire. He had written it in his clearest hand, as though he had known it might be the last thing someone read, and wanted it legible. He wrote that he did not hold Mercer responsible. He wrote that Mercer had told him the risk clearly, and he had chosen to proceed because he believed the work mattered, and because someone had to do it, and because he was, when the moment required it, the someone available. He wrote that a man cannot ask another man to carry a weight that he himself agreed to lift. He wrote last of all, "If this finds Elara instead of Mercer, my dear girl, do not look for someone to blame. Look for someone to trust. They are out there. I have always believed this, and I believe it still." She sat with the journal closed in her lap for a long time after that. Outside the window, the night was very dark and very quiet. She could hear the cattle somewhere in the distance, their low, patient sound. She could hear the wind. She could hear faintly the creak of someone moving in the main room. Colt, she thought. He did not sleep much. She had noticed the light under the door most nights long after she had gone to bed. She got up. He was at the table with the small notebook open in front of him and a cup of coffee gone cold beside it. He had a pencil in his hand, but he was not writing. He was looking at the notebook, the way a person looks at something they have studied many times and still cannot fully resolve. He looked up when she came in. She set her father's journal on the table in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at her. "He didn't blame you," she said. "He wrote it down. The last entry." She pressed her hand flat on the cover. "He said he chose. He said you told him the risk, and he chose to proceed anyway, and that a man cannot ask another man to carry a weight he himself agreed to lift." Colt looked at the journal for a long time without speaking. "He said look for someone to trust," she said. "Not your name. He didn't know if you would see it. He was writing in case I found it." She took her hand off the journal. "I'm telling you, because I think you've been carrying something that was never given to you to carry alone." The lamp between them threw the shadows long across the table. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods, and the clock on the mantel ticked its steady, patient sound, the sound of ordinary time passing in an ordinary place. Colt reached out and put his hand on the journal, not picking it up, just resting it there the way you hold something when you are not ready to open it, but you are ready to stop keeping it at a distance. He did not speak. She did not ask him to. She went back to bed and left him there in the lamplight with the journal beneath his hand, and she thought that whatever came next, Creed and his men and all of it, they would not be going into it as strangers. That was something. In the dark, in the strange waiting quiet of a ranch at the edge of everything that was something real. The woman who carried her father's secrets all the way to Texas, and the broken man who had been waiting for her. The morning after she gave him the journal, Colt was already at the stove when Alara came out of the bedroom. He did not look up. He handed her a cup of coffee without a word, and she took it without a word, and they stood on opposite sides of the kitchen in the thin early light and drank. It was the most honest silence she had ever shared with anyone. She did not ask him whether he had read it. She did not need to. She could see it in the slight heaviness around his eyes, the way he had not quite finished sleeping, the careful way he moved as though something inside him was still settling into its new position. He had read it, and whatever it had done to him, he had not yet decided how to carry it. That was all right. She had been carrying her own version of the same thing for 3 years. She understood that some weights needed time before you could find the right grip on them. Wesley came in from the barn at 7:30, his hair damp from the water trough, a smear of axle grease on his left forearm that he had attempted to scrub away without complete success. He looked at the two of them standing in the kitchen, and then looked away with the instinctive tact of a boy who has learned to read rooms quickly because reading them slowly was dangerous. He sat at the table and accepted a plate from Colt without comment. They ate. Outside, the morning was gray and cold, the sky low, and the wind moving steadily from the northwest. Alara watched it through the kitchen window while she finished her coffee and thought about what her father had written in the last pages of the journal, the lines she had memorized without intending to. He had written about the West as a place where things could begin again. He had written about her stubbornness, about hope. He had written about trust. She looked at Colt's hands on the table, wrapped around his cup. They were scarred in the way that working hands are scarred, not violently, but incrementally, the accumulation of 1,000 small encounters with wire and wood and weather. He wore no ring. She had not expected one, but she noticed the absence the way you notice the space where a picture used to hang. "Creed's going to move soon," Colt said to no one in particular, or to both of them equally. "Weather's turning. He won't want to run a siege in a blizzard." "How long do we have?" Alara asked. 3 days, maybe 4. He set his cup down. "I want to talk to May today, and I want to talk to you both about what we know and what we're going to do with it." Wesley looked up from his plate. He had been eating with that focused, slightly urgent quality she had noticed in him from the beginning, as though some part of him was still not sure the food would last. "I'll tell you everything I know," Wesley said. "I already told you most of it." "Most of it," Colt agreed. He looked at the boy steadily. "I want the rest." Wesley put his fork down. He was quiet for a moment, and Alara watched his face move through something internal. Not resistance exactly, but the particular difficulty of speaking truths that have been kept so long they have grown roots. "My uncle, Wesley said finally, has a man inside the Dallas Detective Agency. Has had him for 3 years, maybe longer. That's how he knew about your investigation. That's how he knew about Mr. Voss." He looked at the table. "I don't know the man's name. I only know he exists because I heard Creed mention a payment once. A significant one. And the timing matched." Colt was very still. "You understand what that means," he said. "It means whoever you trusted in Dallas may have been the one who got Mr. Voss killed," Wesley said. He looked up at Alara then, and his young face was very serious. "I'm sorry. I know that's a hard thing to hear." Alara thought of her father. She thought of the careful oblique entries in the last pages of his journal, the growing caution, the sense of a man who had realized something was wrong, but could not identify the source. He had known, she thought. He had known near the end that the ground beneath him had shifted. He just had not known how far. "It's not a hard thing to hear," she said, and meant it. "It's a true thing. Those aren't always the same." Colt looked at her. Something moved in his expression, that she was getting better at reading a kind of involuntary recognition, the look of a person who has heard their own thought spoken in someone else's voice. He stood and picked up the notebook from the shelf where he had left it, and set it on the table between them. "This is enough to bring down Creed's network," he said. "Your father spent 2 years building this. Names, amounts, routes, dates. It's thorough and it's careful, and it means nothing if the man we hand it to is on Creed's payroll." He looked at Wesley. "The name I need is the name of the man inside the agency. If you know anything else, anything you heard, any detail, any name or description, I need it now." Wesley was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Rains." Colt looked at him. "Not as the corrupt one," Wesley said quickly. "The other way around. I heard my uncle mention Rains as the one he was worried about, the one who wouldn't take money, the one who had been asking questions about the fire independently on his own time without filing reports." He paused. "My uncle Udire was the only man in Dallas he couldn't buy or frighten." He said it like a problem he hadn't solved yet. Colt sat back down, slowly. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. "Rains," he said quietly. "You know him," Alara said. "We worked together. Before." He paused. "I thought he had closed my cases when I left. I thought everyone had." He looked up. "If he's been running his own inquiry for 3 years without support, without filing, he's either the most stubborn man in Texas, or he knows exactly who not to trust." "Both probably," Alara said. The ghost of something crossed Colt's face. Not quite a smile, but its close relation. "Both probably," he agreed. Outside, the wind moved against the house with a low, steady pressure. The clock on the mantel ticked. Alara looked at the notebook on the table and thought about her father sitting in Philadelphia, with a pen and a lamp, and the full knowledge that what he was doing was dangerous, writing down names and numbers with his careful, even hand. She thought about trust, about what it cost, about what it was worth. "We need to get word to Rains," she said, "without going through the agency." "I know where he boards when he's in the field," Colt said. "Town called Seco Creek, 2 days' ride from here." He looked at Wesley. "Can you ride?" "Since I was 4. the boy said. Good. Colt looked at Elara. You're staying here. She looked back at him. Elara. We'll discuss it, she said. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that suggested he understood the discussion was already over, and he had not won it, which was correct. We'll discuss it, he said. The days that followed had a particular texture, purposeful and watchful at once, like the hours before a storm, when the air itself seems to be paying attention. Colt spent the mornings riding the perimeter of his land, mapping approaches and sight lines, with the methodical thoroughness of a man who had once done this professionally. Elara worked with May Hollis, who had appointed herself a permanent fixture at the Broken Spur, without anyone specifically asking her to, and without anyone specifically objecting either. May was not a woman who softened things. Elara had noticed this about her from the beginning, and found it deeply reassuring in the way that honest things tend to be reassuring even when they are uncomfortable. You're in love with him, May said one afternoon without preamble, while they were mending a section of curtain that had rotted at the hem. Elara kept her eyes on her stitching. I've known him 9 days. I've known my mare 12 years, and I'm not in love with her. May bit off a thread. Time's not the point. What is the point? May considered this with the deliberateness she brought to most things. The point is whether you've decided to let yourself know what you already know. She glanced up. Have you? Elara set down her sewing and looked out the window at the gray afternoon. Colt was visible at the far edge of the yard, talking to Ira, his back to the house. She had learned the shape of him at a distance, now the way he stood, the particular angle of his shoulders, when he was explaining something he considered important, the way he went very still when he was listening. I don't know, she said honestly. I think I'm still deciding whether I have the right to. The right to, May repeated. She sounded amused. What would make it a right rather than a choice? Elara did not have an answer to that. She picked up her sewing again. That evening after supper, she found Colt sitting on the back step of the house with a cup of coffee, looking at the sky, which had cleared for the first time in days, the stars coming through bright and cold. She came and sat beside him without asking, and he moved over to give her room without asking either. They sat in silence for a while. The silence between them had changed over the past 9 days. In the beginning, it had been the silence of strangers who did not yet know what to say, polite and careful, edged with the slight tension of two people calibrating each other. Then it had been the working silence of people focused on tasks, the fence line, the kitchen pump, the cattle. A silence that was simply the absence of talk because talk was not required, and they were both efficient enough not to require it. Now it was something else. She was not sure she had a name for it yet. It had the quality of something that had found its level settled into its own weight, comfortable with itself. Tell me about Dallas, she said. He was quiet. She had learned not to rush his quiet. I was good at it, he said eventually. That's the honest answer. I was good at finding things people didn't want found. Patterns. Connections. The way money moves when it's trying not to be seen. He looked at his coffee cup. I liked the work. I believed in it. I thought if you could lay out the truth clearly enough, in enough detail, the right people would act on it. And then I laid out the truth about Creed's network as clearly as I could for 2 years, with your father's help. And the night we were closest to breaking it open, the church burned, and Joseph Voss was dead, and the agency told me the evidence was insufficient. And they were closing the file. He paused. I knew it wasn't insufficient. I knew someone had decided it was. I just couldn't prove which someone, and I was not in a good state by then. Grief, she said quietly. Guilt, he corrected. He said it simply without dramatics, the way he said most things. Grief for what happened to your father. Guilt because I had put him there. Because I had convinced myself the work was important enough to justify the risk to him, And then the risk had become a certainty, and the certainty had become a grave. He looked at the stars. I came out here because I didn't know what else to do. Because the land doesn't ask you to justify yourself. It just asks you to show up and work. My father didn't blame you, she said. I know. You told me. He wrote it down. He paused. That's not the same as me not being responsible. No, she agreed. It's not. But it means you're not carrying it alone. She looked at the stars. He made a choice. You made choices. The man who gave the order to burn that church made a choice. All of those things are true at the same time. He turned to look at her. In the dark, his face was all angles and shadow, the lines of it more pronounced than in daylight, and his eyes were very dark and very direct. You don't sound like a woman who has spent her life in a schoolroom, he said. My father was a very good teacher, she said, even when he wasn't trying to be. A brief silence, and then something happened in his face, the particular small shift she had been watching for, without fully admitting she was watching the thing behind the careful control he wore, like a second skin. It was not much, a slight softening around the eyes, a fraction of loosening in the jaw. But she had come to understand that with Colt Mercer, the small things were the significant ones that he expressed more in a half-inch of movement than other men did in speeches. She looked back at the sky before he could see that she had noticed. Tell me about your parents, she said. The photograph on the mantel. He was quiet for a moment, and she thought he might not answer, but then he said, My father came out from Tennessee after the war. He had some land, some cattle, nothing much. He worked it for 10 years before he could afford to build the house. He looked at the dark outline of the barn. My mother came with him from Tennessee. They had been promised to each other since they were children, and she held him to it, even after everything went sideways. She used to say she didn't see the point in marrying a man who had never been tested. A pause. She was practical that way, and they were happy. He considered this. I think so. It's hard to see your parents clearly when you're a child. They were always just the weather of the place. You don't examine the weather, you just live in it. He looked at the stars. After they were gone, I started to see them as people. That's when I understood how rare what they had was. They were genuinely glad of each other. Not the domestic performance of gladness, not the tolerance that passes for contentment. Actually glad every day that the other one was there. That's what you want, she said. Not a question. He did not answer immediately. She could feel him weighing the honesty of it, measuring whether to give it or deflect. It's what I stopped believing was possible, he said finally. After Dallas. After everything. It felt like something that happened to other people, in other circumstances, not. He stopped. Not to someone who had done what you'd done, she said quietly. He looked at her. I understand that feeling, she said. The sense that certain things have been forfeited, that you've used up the portion of the world's goodwill that was allotted to you. She looked at her hands in the dark. I felt it after my father died. After I couldn't prove what had happened, and no one was looking, and I sold everything and came west. I felt like someone who had failed at the one thing they were supposed to do, and was now just moving through the days until something else happened. A long pause. The coyotes had started up somewhere out on the grass, their intricate conversation with the dark. And now, he asked. She thought about it. Now I think my father would disagree with that assessment, she said. He wrote it down, that I wasn't supposed to look for someone to blame. That I was supposed to look for someone to trust. She turned to look at him directly. He was right about most things. She looked back at the sky. Before he could see that she had noticed what had happened in his face when she said it. They sat there until the cold drove her inside, and when she said goodnight, he said it back in his low, rough voice, and she lay in the dark of the small room for a long time afterward, listening to the wind and thinking about choices, and what they cost, and what sometimes they were worth. 2 days later, the newspaper arrived with Ira from his weekly supply run into the nearest town, and with it a letter that had been sitting at the general store for a week with no one to collect it. The letter was addressed to C. Mercer Broken Spur Ranch, in a handwriting that was clipped and precise and somehow communicated urgency even in the address. Colt opened it at the kitchen table while Elara and Wesley watched him. He read it twice without expression. Then he set it down. "Rains," he said. Elara waited. "He has been in Seco Creek for 2 weeks. He rode out from Dallas alone, didn't file his destination with the office." Colt looked at the letter. "He's been trying to find a way to contact me without being traced. He knew about the notebook." He paused. "He knew about your father." "How?" Wesley asked. "Because he has been running the same inquiry I ran for 3 years with no resources and no support, and the full knowledge that someone in his office was working against him." Colt folded the letter. "He says he has the name of the man inside the agency. He says he needs the notebook and a witness to take to a federal judge in San Antonio. Someone who can testify to Creed's operations directly." He looked at Wesley. Wesley was very still. "That would be me," the boy said. "Yes." A silence. Wesley looked at his hands, then at the table, then at something in the middle distance that only he could see. He was 17 years old, and he had grown up in the shadow of a man who used people the way tools are used until they broke or became inconvenient. He had never been asked to do something because it was right. He had only ever been asked to do things because they were useful. Elara watched him make the calculation. She saw the exact moment he arrived at the answer. "All right," he said. "All right. I'll testify." Colt nodded. He looked at the letter once more. "Rains is coming here. He'll arrive in 2 days, 3 at most. He didn't want to name a meeting place in writing." He set the letter down, "which means when Creed comes, Rains may already be here. Or he may not." "And if he's not?" Elara asked. "Then we hold until he is." And he said it with the same flatness with which he said everything, but she heard what was underneath it. Not bravado, not performance, just the plain factual assessment of a man who had already run the numbers and knew what they added up to. She wanted to say something. She did not yet know what. She picked up the letter and read it herself instead. Rains's handwriting was the handwriting of a man in a hurry, abbreviated slightly cramped, the words leaning forward as though they were trying to get somewhere faster than the hand could carry them. But in the last paragraph, he had written something that made her stop entirely. He had written, "I know about Voss. I know what he was doing and why and what it cost him. For what it is worth, which I understand may not be much, he was the bravest civilian I have encountered in 20 years of this work. He deserved better than he got. So did his daughter, if she is still out there. I hope she is." She set the letter down carefully. She looked at Colt. He was watching her. He had read it. He had known she would read it. "He knew about me," she said. "Your father talked about you," Colt said, "in his early reports, before he understood how careful he needed to be." A pause. "He was proud of you. He said you were the best thing he had ever taught, and he had not even meant to teach you." She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry. She had done her crying in the small room with the journal, and it had been sufficient, and she was not going to do it again in front of this man who was already carrying enough of her father's weight. "All right," she said the same words Wesley had used in the same tone, not resignation, but decision. "What do we do next?" The next day and a half had the quality of held breath. May's 2 brothers arrived on the second morning, men in their 50s, broad and weathered, and sparing with words, who came with rifles and the particular calm of people who have lived long enough in open country to understand that danger is a condition of existence and not a reason to panic. May introduced them as Cal and Denny, and they shook hands with Colt, and looked at Alara and Wesley with brief, appraising glances, and went directly to look at the lay of the land, which told Alara everything she needed to know about them. Colt spent those 2 days preparing with a different quality than his ordinary ranch work, more focused, more deliberate, each action connected to a calculation she could not entirely follow, but respected. He checked every weapon in the house and cleaned and loaded them. He walked the ground around the broken spur in a widening circle, looking at it the way she imagined he had once looked at crime scenes. He talked to Cal and Denny and May in low voices that she did not try to overhear. She stayed close to the house. She practiced with the revolver Colt had shown her. She stood in the yard in the cold morning and fired at a fence post until her arm ached, and her aim had stopped being entirely a matter of hope and started being something closer to intention. She was not good. She was getting less bad, which was different and possibly sufficient. Wesley watched her practice one afternoon from the barn door. He said nothing for a while. Then he said, "You're flinching before the shot." She stopped. "I know." "You have to trust it," he said. "The trigger. You have to commit before you squeeze." She looked at him. "Is that something your uncle taught you?" He looked away. "He taught me a lot of things I wish he hadn't, and some things I'm glad he did. That's the truth of it." She turned back to the fence post and fired again, this time without flinching, and the shot landed within 2 inches of where she had aimed. "Better," Wesley said, and went back into the barn. That evening, she was the one who went to sit on the back step. The sky had gone deep blue in the west, the last light clinging to the horizon, and the air smelled of cold grass and coming winter. She heard the door open behind her and did not turn around because she knew the sound of his step. Colt sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. "I want to tell you something," she said finally. "All right. When I left Philadelphia, I thought I was going west because I believed in something. Education. The frontier. Making a difference somewhere new." She looked at the fading sky. "But I think the truer reason was that I needed to go somewhere no one knew what my father had been accused of. Somewhere I could just be a person and not a story." She paused. "I was running away from something I should have been running toward." "The journal," Colt said. "The truth in it, yes." She turned to look at him. His profile against the darkening sky was very still, very attentive. "I spent 3 years being angry at a closed case, at people who wouldn't look for answers. And the whole time the answer was in a leather journal I was too frightened to finish reading." "You weren't ready." "I wasn't ready," she agreed. "I'm not sure I would have been ready without—" She stopped. "Without what?" She looked at him directly. "Without this. Without being brought somewhere I had no choice but to stop running." A pause. "Without you." He looked at her for a moment with that expression she had come to know, and still could not entirely read the careful-held quality of a man who has spent years not permitting himself things, and is only now beginning to question why. He looked back at the horizon. "I owe your father a debt I can't repay," he said. "I have known that since the night of the fire. I have lived with it for 3 years." He paused. "I don't want whatever is between us to be built on that. I don't want you to think I'm protecting you because of him." "I don't think that," she said. "You should at least consider it." "I've considered it." She held his gaze when he turned to look at her. "And I've also considered that you left coffee at my door before you knew who I was. That you gave your spare room to a stranger and asked nothing in return. That you looked at a 17-year-old boy with your enemy's blood in his veins and treated him like a person." She paused. "Those things happened before you knew my name. They're not about debt." He was very quiet. Outside, the last light dropped below the horizon, and the stars began to come through, and the wind moved cold and steady across the grassland. And somewhere in the dark, a coyote said something to the night that the night did not answer. Elara, he said. It was just her name. But the way it sat in his low voice, careful and certain at once, was its own kind of sentence. She did not say anything back. She did not need to. She sat there beside him in the dark until the cold made it necessary to go in. And then she stood. And he stood, and they went inside, and neither of them said good night, because good night implied a separation that felt just then like something neither of them was quite prepared for. She went to her room. She did not sleep for a long time, but it was not fear that kept her awake. 3 days before Rains arrived, Creed came. Not with all 12 men, not yet. He came with 4, a probing attack, the move of a man who wanted to test the ground before he committed to it. They came in the late afternoon from the east, pushing hard, and Rex heard them first, and barked, and Colt was at the window before the sound had finished traveling across the yard. "Get Wesley," he said to Elara. "Back door. Now." She went. Wesley was in the tack room, and she came through the barn at a run and said, "They're here," and the boy was on his feet before she finished the sentence, the particular reflexes of someone who had spent years living with the possibility of exactly this. "How many?" 4. Maybe more. He picked up the rifle that Colt had given him 2 days ago after the conversation at the table, after he had looked at Wesley for a long moment, and said, "If you're going to be here, you need to be able to defend it." Wesley had accepted it without ceremony, which told Elara everything she needed to know about his relationship with guns. Not fear of them, not excitement, just the recognition of a tool and the knowledge of how to use it. The 4 riders came into the yard fast, and Colt stepped out onto the porch, and the exchange was brief and brutal, and nothing like the stories she had read in her Philadelphia parlor about frontier confrontations. There was no parley, no speech-making. Creed's men opened fire from the saddle, and Colt returned fire from the porch steps, and everything was noise and smoke, and the panicked sound of horses. She was at the kitchen window when one of them came around the back of the house. He was moving low and fast, and she saw him before he saw her, and she raised the revolver the way Colt had shown her, and fired once through the window glass, and the man stumbled and fell back, and did not get up. She stood there with the gun still raised and the broken glass around her feet, and the smell of powder in the air, and thought with extraordinary clarity that she was not the same person who had left Philadelphia 6 months ago. Wesley had come around the far side of the barn and fired twice, and the remaining rider wheeled and ran, and then there was a long moment of ringing silence. Colt had been hit. Not badly, a graze along his left arm, blood soaking through the sleeve of his shirt. The kind of wound that looked worse than it was, and would heal cleanly if it was cleaned properly. He was standing at the porch rail when she came around the front of the house, assessing the yard, counting cataloging. He looked at her with an expression that was, she would think about it later, lying awake, not relief exactly. Something beyond relief. The look of a man who has discovered something important by almost losing it. "You're bleeding," she said. "I know. Come inside." He came. She cleaned and wrapped the wound at the kitchen table, working with the same care he had shown her wrists on the first night, and they did not speak much. Wesley sat at the far end of the table and cleaned the rifle with the focus of someone who needed something to do with his hands. Outside, the afternoon light was already going, the sky turning that deep, bruised purple that preceded dark. "He's testing us," Colt said. "I know. Next time he won't send 4. He looked at his arm. "He's going to come with everything he has." "I know that, too." She tied off the bandage and sat back. "But he left 4 men fewer than he started with, and we're still here." Colt looked at her for a moment. Then, with the particular economy of expression she had come to read so precisely, he nodded. Once. That was enough. In the morning, she went out before Colt was up and stood in the yard in the thin, cold light and waited. She had found the journal on her nightstand when she woke. He had left it there in the night without a note, without explanation. the way he did everything important. She had picked it up and held it, and understood what it meant. He had read it, and he had given it back. He came out at his usual time, coat on hat in hand, and stopped when he saw her. She held out the journal. He looked at it. He looked at her. "He didn't blame you," she said. "He wrote it plainly. He chose he understood the risk, and he did not hold you responsible." She held his gaze. "I needed you to know that from me. Not just from the page. From me." Colt reached out and took the journal with both hands. He held it the way he had held it before, without opening it, just holding it. The morning light was coming across the grassland from the east, long and pale and level, and the cattle were beginning to move in the north pasture. And it was an ordinary morning on a working ranch, and also not ordinary at all. "I'm sorry about your father," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I know," she said. They stood there in the morning light for a moment, the journal between them, and everything it contained, and the distance between them was smaller than it had been the day before. Then he put the journal carefully inside his coat, against his chest, and they went in for coffee. The next morning, Rains arrived. He came from the east alone, riding a bay horse that was tired, but not spent, a man who pushed hard, but not past sense. He was somewhere in his late 40s, lean and straight-backed, with a face that had been severe to begin with, and had only grown more so with time. He wore no badge. He dismounted in the yard, and looked at the house, and then at Colt, who had come out to meet him, and something passed between them that had the quality of old knowledge, the shorthand of men who have worked together closely, and then not at all for a long time. "You look like hell," Rains said to Colt. "You look like a man who has been sleeping in a boarding house for 3 weeks, Colt said. 3.5. Rains glanced toward the house. "The woman, inside." Rains nodded. He looked at the yard, at the rifle propped by the door, at May's gray mare, tied at the post, at the general configuration of things. He was reading the situation the way Colt had read crime scenes, quickly, thoroughly, without telegraphing his conclusions. "They're close," he said. "My information says Creed left his camp 2 nights ago. 12 men." "I know," Colt said. "Come inside." The 5 of them sat around Colt's table, Colt and Rains and Alara and Wesley and May, with Cal and Denny, visible through the window, keeping watch from the yard, and Rains laid out what he knew with the efficiency of a man who had been holding it too long and was relieved to finally put it down, somewhere it could be used. He had a name. The man inside the Dallas agency who had been feeding information to Creed for 3 years. He had a paper trail, thin, carefully constructed over 2 years of unauthorized inquiry that connected the man to 3 payments that could not be explained by his salary. He needed the notebook. He needed Wesley's testimony. And he needed to get both to a federal judge in San Antonio before Creed could reach them. "How do you get to San Antonio from here?" Alara said, "with Creed between us and every road south." Rains looked at her. It was the look of a man reassessing something he had underestimated. "There's a route through the hill country," Colt said. "Takes longer, avoids the main roads." 3 days instead of 1, Rains said. "We'd need a head start." "You'd need to go tonight," May said. She had been quiet through most of it, listening with her characteristic attention. "Before Creed gets here, take the boy and the notebook and go tonight." A silence. "That leaves you here," Rains said to Colt. He meant it as a statement of plain fact. He did not dress it up. "Yes," Colt said. Alara looked at him. He did not look back at her immediately. He was looking at Rains at the table, running through the geometry of it, the same calculation she could see him making, the same arithmetic of who went where and what was left behind, and what that meant for each person remaining. Then he looked at her. And she understood in the clear, cold way she was coming to understand things out here, that the conversation they needed to have before tomorrow was the one they needed to have tonight. The woman who carried her father's secrets all the way to Texas, and the broken man who had been waiting for her. They sent Rains and Wesley out at 9:30 before the moon had risen fully, while the dark still held enough depth to swallow 2 riders moving quietly. Colt stood in the yard and watched them go, the detective on his tired bay, and the boy on a horse from Colt's own remuda, the notebook wrapped in oilskin inside Wesley's coat against his chest. Before Wesley mounted, he had stopped in front of Ilara. He was 17 years old, and he had the look of someone very tired of being afraid, and very ready to be something else instead. He said, "Your father wrote down things that could have gotten him killed faster if Creed had found the journal instead of just the notebook. He kept the journal separate on purpose. He wanted there to be something left that wasn't about the case." He paused. "Something that was just about you." Ilara looked at him. "He talked about you," Wesley said, "to my uncle in the beginning when he was first brought to camp. Creed would ask him questions about who he knew, and he would talk about you. I think he did it on purpose. I think he was telling himself you were real while everything else was trying to make him forget it." She could not speak for a moment. "Thank you," she said finally, "for telling me that." Wesley nodded. He mounted and followed Rains into the dark, and they were gone, the hoofbeats fading until there was nothing but the ordinary sounds of the night. She stood in the yard after they left, and looked at the place where the darkness had closed behind them. And then she looked at Colt, who was still watching the same place, his hands at his sides, his face unreadable in the dim light from the house. "Come inside," she said. He came. May had gone to the barn to sit with her brothers, giving them the house without making a production of it, which was entirely like her. The fire had burned down to coals. Ilara built it up, while Colt stood by the window checking the dark at regular intervals with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who has learned that vigilance and anxiety are not the same thing. She made coffee. It was something to do with her hands, and she needed something to do with her hands. When she turned around, he was sitting at the table. She brought the cups and sat across from him, and they looked at each other in the firelight, and she thought about everything that had been said in the past 10 days, and everything that had not been said, and she decided that she was done waiting to be ready. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said. "Not about Creed, not about the plan, what you are actually thinking right now, tonight." He looked at his cup for a moment, then he looked at her. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that I have spent 4 years in this house trying to want nothing, trying to reduce everything down to what was necessary. The cattle, the fence, the work. Because wanting things, and then losing them, is its own particular kind of damage, and I had taken enough damage." He paused. "And then you came out of a creek bed half dead, and upended everything I had decided." The fire shifted. Somewhere outside, the wind pushed against the eaves with a soft, steady sound. "I don't know if we get through tomorrow," he said. His voice was even not dramatic, just honest in the way he was honest about everything. 12 men is 12 men, and I have done the arithmetic on it, and the arithmetic does not come out clean. I need you to know that." "I know that," she said, "and I need you to know that whatever I feel—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together. For a man who was controlled almost to a fault, she had learned to watch for the moments when the control became visible, when you could see the effort of it, because those were the moments when what was underneath was largest. "Whatever I feel about you, I am not saying it because I think tonight might be the last chance. I am not going to do that to you. I am not going to make it into something that only has value because of the circumstances." She looked at him for a long moment. "Colt," she said. "Yes. I have been in this house for 10 days. I have watched you work and listened to you talk, and sat beside you in the dark more than once, and I have made my own assessment." She held his gaze steadily. "I don't need you to protect me from the circumstances. I need you to tell me the truth." He was very still. "The truth," he said, "is that I have not felt at home in my own house since my parents died. And somewhere in the last 10 days, that changed." He looked at her directly. All the careful distance gone, just the thing itself, plain and irreversible. That's the truth. She breathed out slowly. The truth on my side, she said, is that I came out here to build a life from scratch, and I had a very specific idea of what that life would look like, and it looked nothing like this. Nothing like a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a man who talks less than anyone I have ever met and digs graves at midnight. She paused. And I have never in my life felt so clearly that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. They sat with that for a moment. The fire cracked and settled. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not clasping it, not gripping, just covering it the way you cover something that matters to keep it warm and to let it know you are there. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that until May knocked on the door and said riders had been spotted on the northern ridge, and then they let go and picked up their guns and went out to meet what was coming. The night was very cold and very dark. Colt moved through it the way he moved through everything without waste, without drama, with the focused quiet of a person who has made their peace with what they are about to do. Ilara moved beside him, and May moved behind them, and Cal and Denny were already in position in the barn and at the far corner of the corral, exactly where Colt had placed them during the preceding 2 days. They had planned this. Colt had planned it the way he once planned investigations, thinking backward from the likely outcome, building in contingencies, not assuming the first approach would be the one that mattered. Creed would expect the house to be defended from the inside. Creed would expect Colt to play a waiting game. Creed would not expect the people inside the house to already be outside of it, positioned and ready in the dark. Colt had placed them in the shadows of the yard, Ilara behind the water trough. May behind the woodpile himself at the corner of the barn. Cal and Denny in positions that covered the 2 most likely approaches to the house. The corral was between them and the northern ridge, and the horses in it would mask their heat and their sound from anyone approaching from that direction. They waited. 10 minutes. The stars au-dessus wheeled overhead in their cold, patient way. The wind moved the grass in the dark, and the grass moved like water, and the sound of it was almost peaceful. Ilara knelt behind the water trough with the revolver in her hand, and looked at the northern darkness, and breathed carefully, and thought of her father doing something brave for years, in quiet rooms with a pen. She heard them before she saw them. The low sound of horses moving carefully, the controlled sound of men who were trying to be silent and were mostly succeeding. She counted hoofbeats, the way Colt had taught her a count, that told her direction and rough number. They were coming from the north and the east, splitting their approach, which was smart. The first shot came from the east, one of Creed's men, not fully settled into position, yet spooked by something in the dark. The shot went wide and high, and it broke the silence like a stone through ice, and then everything moved at once. Cal's rifle answered from the corral corner. May was firing from the woodpile with a steadiness that Ilara would think about later, the particular steadiness of someone who has lived alone for years and learned to rely entirely on herself. Colt's rifle spoke from the barn corner twice, 3 times, measured and deliberate, and she heard a man cry out from the eastern approach. 2 of Creed's riders came from the north at a gallop, apparently deciding that speed was their answer to the ambush, and Ilara rose from behind the water trough and fired twice. The first shot missed. The second did not. One of the horses shied and broke left, and the rider lost his seat and went down, and by the time he was trying to get up again, Denny was on him from the barn. She dropped back behind the trough. Her hands were shaking. She breathed and steadied and waited for the next moment. Then a hand closed around her arm from behind. She had not heard him come around the side of the water tank. He had moved through the chaos, the way all truly dangerous men move through chaos, using it rather than fighting it, finding the spaces between the noise and the gunfire, and the attention pointed elsewhere. Harlan Creed had not survived 20 years in this business by fighting fair. He pulled her upright. Not roughly, that was the thing that frightened her more than roughness would have. He did it with the deliberate control of a man who did not need to use force because force was already implicit in every other thing about him. His left arm came around her from behind, and he held her against him, and his mouth was near her ear, and he spoke quietly enough that no one else could hear him over the gunfire. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "And I'm not using you as a shield. I need you to listen to me for 30 seconds. She went very still. She had the revolver in her right hand, but his arm was around her ribs, and she could not get the angle, and he knew it. "Your father sent you west," Creed said. His voice was perfectly level. "He pointed you toward Texas. You think that was coincidence, a grieving daughter following a dream she had before her father died. But he wrote letters before the fire. Letters he sent through a circuit that could not be traced. One of them went to a man in Secco Creek, a boarding house keeper he had corresponded with about the route. The letter described you, your age, your purpose, your direction of travel." He paused. He knew where Mercer had gone. He knew Mercer was at the broken spur. He sent you toward it. She was breathing very carefully. "He wanted Mercer to know he'd been forgiven," Creed said. "And he wanted someone to look after you. He thought Mercer owed him that much." Something shifted in his voice, not softness, nothing like softness, but a kind of cold precision. "I'm telling you this, so you'll ask yourself whether what you feel when you look at that man is real, or whether you're simply the last thing his dead friend asked him to take care of." He released her. She stepped away and turned around and raised the revolver, and for a long moment they looked at each other across 2 feet of cold air. Harlan Creed looked back at her with those flat, calculating eyes and said nothing more. He had planted the thing he wanted to plant. He turned and walked toward his horse at the fence line, with the unhurried certainty of a man who had done what he came to do. She did not shoot him in the back. She thought about it, the practical arithmetic of it, the lives it might save, the notebook it might protect. She thought about it with perfect clarity for approximately 2 seconds. Then she thought about what her father had written, about trust, about what it required. She lowered the revolver. "Colt," she called. He was there in seconds, coming around the corner of the barn at a run, and he saw Creed at the fence line, and his hand went to his gun. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "He said something to me," she said. "I'll tell you later. But right now we need to know where he's going, and I think I know." Colt looked at her for one long moment, with those dark, direct eyes that did not waver. He was reading her the way he read everything completely, without assumption, letting what was actually there be what it was, rather than what he expected. "The Ford," he said. "The Ford," she agreed. The fight lasted 11 minutes by the clock, though it felt much longer and much shorter, at the same time the way things do when the body has taken over from the mind and is simply doing what it knows. When it was over, 4 of Creed's men had been captured, and 4 more had broken off and fled into the dark. 3 were down wounded to varying degrees. 1 was dead, and Harlan Creed was not among any of them. Colt said this quietly to May and Alara, as the 3 of them stood together in the yard in the aftermath, the smoke and cold, and the sounds of wounded men around them. He said it without inflection, which was how she knew it was a serious problem. "He sent the men first," May said, "to flush us out, see how we were positioned." "Yes," Colt said. "He's still out there," Alara said. "Yes." She looked at the darkness beyond the corral. It was the same darkness it had always been, unchanged, patient, offering nothing. "He'll go for the notebook," she said. "If he knows Raines is heading for San Antonio." "He knows," Colt said. "He was watching us. He'll have seen them leave." She looked at him. "How long do they have?" she said. "If he rides hard and cuts through the canyon road, He stopped. He ran the calculation. Not long enough. She was already moving toward the corral. "Elara." "Which horse?" she said. "Which one can to run?" He was beside her in 3 strides. "You're not going alone." "Then come," she said. "But we go now." There was one moment very brief, where she could see him working through it, the trained caution of a man who does not act without a plan, measured against the plain mathematics of time and distance. She watched him arrive at the answer. "The black at the far end," he said, "and the roan. Saddles are in the—" "I know where the saddles are," she said. They saddled in the dark in under 4 minutes, which she would not have thought possible 2 weeks ago, and barely thought about now. May appeared at the barn door and said, "I'll manage here," and meant it, and Elara believed her, because she had learned to believe May Hollis when she stated a thing as fact. They rode out hard into the dark. The hill country road ran southeast from the broken spur, through a series of low ridges and dry creek crossings that Colt knew and Elara did not, so she rode on his left and let him lead, and concentrated on keeping her seat and her direction. The black was fast and responsive, long-striding, eating the dark ground, with a will that suggested it was glad to be running. She thought of nothing except the rhythm of the horse beneath her and the sound of Colt's roan ahead. After 20 minutes, Colt pulled up on a low rise and listened. She pulled up beside him and listened too. Wind, grass, the very distant sound of frogs near water, and then carried faintly from the south hoofbeats, moving fast, and below them barely visible a single pinprick of light in the darkness, moving with purpose. "That's Creed," Colt said quietly. "He's not chasing them. He's trying to get ahead of them." She looked at the dark terrain between them and that moving light. She thought about the geography Colt had described over the past 2 days. The canyon road that cut the journey short, the place where the hill country route and the canyon route converged at a single narrow crossing over shallow water. "He's going to cut them off at the ford," she said. "Yes." "How far ahead is he?" "Not far. If we go cross-country, if we don't follow the road." He looked at the dark ground between them and the light, the rough terrain, the absence of any visible path. "It's a risk. Rough ground in the dark. Holes. Hidden drop-offs. A horse could go down." She looked at the moving light and thought about Rains and Wesley at the ford, unaware. She thought about the notebook in its oilskin wrapper. She thought about her father writing names by lamplight in Philadelphia, doing the dangerous thing because someone had to. "Go," she said. He went. She went with him. What followed was the most frightening 20 minutes of riding she had ever done, and she had in the past 2 weeks raised her baseline considerably. The black was sure-footed, but the ground was treacherous. Twice she felt it check and gather itself over something she could not see, and twice she gave it its head and let it find the way. She kept her eyes on the light ahead, rather than the ground below, using it as her fixed point, letting her body stay loose and responsive to the horse's movement beneath her. Colt was slightly ahead and to her right. She could hear him rather than see him, the sound of the roan's hooves on the hard-packed earth, the small adjustments of his weight in the saddle. She fixed on that sound, the way she had fixed on the light. They came over the last rise and dropped down to the ford just as Creed reached the near bank. He was alone. She had not expected that. She had expected men numbers the same configuration that had come to the ranch. But Harlan Creed had apparently decided that moving fast required moving light, and he had ridden ahead alone, and now he sat his horse at the near edge of the crossing and looked at them, coming down the slope toward him, with an expression she could not make out in the dark. Colt pulled up. She pulled up beside him. The ford was narrow 20 feet of shallow water over flat rock, the current quick and cold and audible in the dark. On the far bank just visible were 2 figures on horseback who had halted at the sound of hooves. Rains and Wesley stopped and watching. Between them and Creed, the water. "Mercer," Creed said. His voice was the voice she had heard described and had imagined, and the reality of it was both what she had expected and not. It was calm, almost mild, the voice of a man who was not performing for anyone. "You have been a thorn in my side for 4 years. 5, Colt said. 5. Creed seemed to accept the correction without resentment. He glanced at Alara. "And this is Voss's daughter." "Yes," she said. He looked at her with the flat assessment of a man who does not see people as people, but as variables, quantities that either help or hinder the equation. There was nothing personal in it. She found that oddly less frightening than malice would have been. Malice could be provoked and redirected. This was pure calculation. "Your father was competent," Creed said. "I'll give him that. He kept it separate, the evidence and the personal record. I destroyed the evidence and missed the record. 3 years later it comes back." He looked at the water between them. "That's the kind of mistake that ends things." "It is," Alara agreed. He looked at her again, and she looked back at him, and she thought very clearly he is going to raise the rifle, and when he does, Colt will move, and I need to be ready, and I need to be ready now. "I'm going to offer you something," Creed said. "One time. Walk away. Ride back to the ranch. Leave the notebook at the crossing and take the woman and go. I'll let Mercer live, and I'll disappear into Mexico, and in 5 years, no one will remember any of this." "No," Colt said. "You haven't thought about it." "Didn't need to." Creed was quiet for a moment. He had the stillness of a man who has already made his decision, but is taking inventory of the situation before he acts on it. Then he said, "All right," and raised the rifle. What happened next happened very fast. Colt went left, and drew and fired in a motion she had watched him practice, and knew was coming. Creed's shot went wide. Alara's shot, she had raised the revolver when she saw his hand move toward the rifle, before it came level. Before she had consciously decided to fire, took him in the shoulder and knocked his aim further wide, and the rifle fell from his hands and clattered into the shallow water below. Creed looked at her. She looked back at him. He was still on his horse, still upright, his right arm hanging useless and his left hand gripping the saddle horn. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen in his face before, not fear exactly, but the particular recognition of a man who has miscalculated significantly and knows it. "You," he said. Just that. "Me," she said. From the far bank she heard Raines's voice, sharp and carrying. She heard hoofbeats in the water. Raines coming across, one hand on his reins and one on the pistol at his hip. Wesley hanging back on the far bank, keeping clear of the crossing, the way a boy trained to survive knows to do when armed men are moving. Creed looked at Raines crossing toward him. He looked at Colt. He looked at his rifle somewhere in the current below the crossing. He did not reach for the pistol at his own hip. She watched for it. He did not reach. "If I surrender," he said with the same mild calm, "the man inside the Dallas agency will destroy everything before you can reach him." "I have his name," Raines said. He had reached the near bank and brought his horse to a stop a few feet from Creed, the pistol level and steady. "And I have someone waiting in Dallas to move on him the moment I send word. That was taken care of 2 days ago." He looked at Creed steadily. "It's over. Whatever you're calculating, it's over." A silence. The creek ran cold and fast over the flat rock. Somewhere upstream, a night bird called once and went quiet. The stars overhead were enormous and very still, the same stars that had been there through all of it, indifferent and permanent. Harlan Creed looked at his own right hand, hanging useless at his side. He looked at Raines. He looked at Colt. He looked last at Alara. "Your father," he said, "should have stayed in Philadelphia." She held his gaze. She thought about what he had said to her in the yard, his mouth near her ear, the thing he had planted so carefully in the chaos of the fight. She had been carrying it since then, turning it over, examining it the way you examine a thing you are not sure is a weapon or a gift. "He sent me west," she said. "You're right about that. He knew where Mercer was. He pointed me toward it." She paused. "What you got wrong is what you thought that meant." Creed looked at her with those flat eyes. "You thought it would make me doubt what I feel," she said. "You thought if I knew my father had engineered the collision, if I knew Colt might feel bound by obligation, it would hollow everything out." She looked at him steadily. "But my father knew Colt Mercer. He knew the kind of man he was. He didn't send me to someone who would tend to me out of guilt. He sent me to someone he trusted to see me clearly." She paused. "That's not manipulation. That's a father using the last thing he had to take care of his daughter. And the only thing I feel about it is grateful." Something moved in Creed's face. The calculation, she thought, finally arriving at a number it did not have a response for. He dropped his left hand from the saddle horn and raised it empty to the side. Rains moved forward, and Colt moved forward, and what came next was the unhurried business of restraint and disarmament, the procedural work that follows something enormous and makes it real. Elara stood to one side and watched with the strange, detached clarity of a person who has been inside something and is now for the first time able to see it from the outside. From the far bank, Wesley urged his horse into the water and crossed. He came up the near bank and pulled up beside Elara, and they stood together, the boy and the woman, and watched. "Are you all right?" she asked him. "Yes," he said. Then after a moment, "Are you?" She thought about it honestly. Her hands had stopped shaking. The revolver was back in its holster. Behind her, the sky was beginning to show the very first pale suggestion of dawn, a barely perceptible shift in the quality of the dark, the world's announcement that it intended to continue. "Yes," she said. "I think so." Rains bound Creed's hands with practiced efficiency and examined the wounded shoulder, and said it was not mortal, which Elara had already concluded. Colt stood back and watched with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not relief, not triumph, something quieter and more complete. The look of a thing finally put down after being carried a very long way. She went to him. She did not say anything. She stood beside him and looked at the creek and the first gray light coming in from the east, and he turned his head and looked at her, and then he looked back at the water. "It's done," he said. "Yes. He'll go to trial. There's enough the notebook Raines's evidence Wesley's testimony. It'll hold." "I know. The man in Dallas will be arrested today. Raines planned it that way." "I know." She turned to look at him fully. "Colt." "Yes." "It's done," she said. "You can stop running through the arithmetic." He looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, there was nothing behind his eyes except what was actually there. No careful distance, no managed weight, no held thing keeping him from himself. Just him in the growing light looking at her. "All right," he said. She reached over and drew the journal from inside his coat, slowly, the way you take something fragile from someone's hands. He let her. She turned it in the growing light for a moment, the tarnished clasp, the leather worn soft from years of being carried and years of being afraid to open. Then she put it in his hands. He held it. He did not open it. He simply held it. His hands covering the cover, the way he held things that mattered completely, without show. The sky above them moved through purple, into pink, into the first pale gold of a Texas dawn. They did not speak. The creek ran cold and steady over the flat rock. Somewhere behind them, the horses shifted and stamped, and Raines said something quiet to Cal, and the two of them stood at the edge of the water with the journal between them, and 3 years of wait and grief and distance, and the long particular silence of two people who have finally stopped running from the same thing. That was enough. That was everything. The ride back to the broken spur took longer than the ride out. They traveled at a walk, Creed under guard, between Rains and Cal Wesley riding ahead with Denny, who had come out to meet them on the road. Elara rode beside Colt, and they did not speak much, but the silence had a different quality now, not the waiting silence of the preceding days, but something that had space in it, room for what was coming. The sun came up as they rode. It came slowly, the way Texas mornings come in October, the sky moving through its long gradations of color, the deep blue giving way to purple, and then to the complex pinks and golds that the grassland does something remarkable with catching and throwing back the light in ways she had not expected when she first arrived, and had been finding ways to be surprised by ever since. She looked at the country around her, the low hills and the dry grass, and the scattered live oaks, and the enormous open sky above all of it, indifferent and beautiful and permanent. She thought of her father writing about the West as a place where things could begin again. She thought he had been right in the way he was usually right about things she did not understand immediately. May was in the yard when they rode in, standing with her arms crossed, and a look on her face that was relief rendered as composure. She looked at Creed and said nothing. She looked at Elara and said, "Coffee's on," which was Elara had come to understand May's language for a number of things and that other people used more words for. The days that followed were the days of aftermath. Aftermath had its own particular texture, she was learning. It was not quiet exactly, but it was a different kind of noise than what had preceded it. Administrative procedural, the practical work of closing things rather than fighting them. Men came and went. Statements were given. The legal machinery began its slow grinding, and Rains was the one who fed it careful and thorough the way he seemed to do everything. 2 nights after the ford, Elara sat alone in the kitchen long after supper was cleared and wrote in her journal for 3 hours without stopping. She wrote about the creek bed where Colt had found her. She wrote about the tack room and Wesley's badly wrapped arm and the look on his face when she had said, "Sit down. We're past the point of holding things back." She wrote about the newspaper in the stack by the door and what it had felt like to find it, the particular quality of that recognition, the way the floor had not actually moved, but had felt as though it might. She wrote about her father's last entry, and the words she had memorized, "Do not look for someone to blame, look for someone to trust," and what it had meant to finally understand them, not as comfort, but as instruction. She wrote about the ford, about Creed's voice saying your father should have stayed in Philadelphia, and what it had felt like to answer him, the strange clarity of it, the sense that she was speaking not just for herself, but in a direct line from a man who had sat at a desk in Philadelphia 3 years ago and written down the same essential thing in different words. She wrote about Colt. Not everything. Some things she was not ready to put into writing, which seemed to her the right instinct, the sense that certain things needed to be lived fully before they could be recorded. But she wrote about the quality of his silences, the way he had left coffee at her door before he knew her name, the way he had held her father's journal without opening it. She wrote that she thought she understood now what her father had meant about trust, not the trust that is given freely because the world is safe, but the trust that is chosen deliberately, because the alternative is to be alone with everything you cannot carry. And that kind of alone, her father had understood, was the most dangerous kind. When she finally set the pen down, her hand was cramped and the lamp was low, and she felt for the first time in a very long time that she had caught up to herself. Rains left the second morning with Creed and 2 of Cal's horses, and a letter from Colt that would arrive in Dallas ahead of them. He shook Colt's hand for a long time before he mounted. He looked at Elara and said, "Your father would be glad." And she nodded and did not trust herself to say more than that. And that was enough. Wesley stayed. He had nowhere specific to go, and Colt had said in his way that there was no hurry, and so Wesley stayed and helped with the cattle and the fence line, and was quietly, steadily useful in the way that people are useful when they have spent their whole lives being used and have finally found something worth working for. He was good with horses. He was learning to be good with people. He was 17, and the worst thing that had ever happened to him was also in a way that Alara understood now, with some depth, the thing that had led him somewhere he could start over. She knew something about that. She wrote letters to the school board in Harlan Falls, explaining her delay and inquiring about the position. She wrote to a woman in Philadelphia who had been a friend of her mother's and might still be living. She wrote to no one specific in the long journal entries that were not evidence and not record, but only the private attempt to understand what had happened to her and what it had made her. She taught Wesley his letters more formally than the haphazard way he had come to them before. He was quick with it, surprisingly quick with the focused intensity of someone who had realized late that knowledge was a kind of protection and was determined to arm himself as thoroughly as possible. She gave him a copy of Robinson Crusoe from Colt's shelf, and he read it in 4 days, and his questions about it were the questions of someone thinking, not just consuming. She watched Colt with him. The way Colt corrected him on the rope, the way he explained the seasonal patterns of the cattle, the way he sometimes simply worked beside him in silence, that was not exclusion, but inclusion, the quiet acknowledgement of a shared task. Colt did not have a talent for warmth exactly, but he had something that functioned similarly, a steadiness, a consistency, a way of being present that was its own form of care. She recognized it because she had felt it directed at her. 3 weeks after the ford on a gray November afternoon, Alara sat in the yard mending a coat and watching the cattle in the north pasture, and she thought, I am going to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go, not because the circumstances had decided it for her, because she looked at the land around her and the house behind her and the man working at the barn door, and she knew with the particular clarity that comes when you have stopped arguing with yourself that this was where she belonged. She had not said it out loud yet. She did not need to. She thought Colt probably knew. She thought May certainly knew, because May always knew, and had probably known before Alara did. The evening of that same day, after supper, Colt sat on the back step, and she came and sat beside him, the way she had come to do, and he moved over the way he had come to do, and they looked at the darkening sky and the cattle and the far hills turning purple in the fading light. I had a letter back from the school board, she said. I know. You left it on the table. Circuit teaching. The settlements around here need someone. I know what circuit teaching is. A pause. It means riding a route, staying places overnight. Yes. You'd need a horse. She looked at him. I have one. You gave me one. The black's yours if you want her. She waited. Wesley's staying on, he said. For now, if he wants. Good. She looked at the sky. Then the ranch would be fine. Yes, he said. It would. She turned to look at him, and he turned to look at her, and they were very close in the fading light, and she thought about the night before the ford, his hand covering hers, the way he had said her name. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I want you to know that. Circuit teaching doesn't mean going anywhere. It means coming back. He looked at her for a long time. I know, he said. I want to hear you say it. A pause. Not resistance, she knew the difference by now. Just the time it took him to find the words for the thing he was not accustomed to saying. I know you're staying, he said. I know this is where you belong. I've known it for a while. He looked at her with the full directness she had come to trust completely. And I want you to. I want you to stay. Not because of your father or because of what happened, or because I owe anything to anyone. Because this place is better with you in it. Because I am better with you in it. He stopped. Then very quietly, that's the truth. She reached out and took his hand. He held it. "All right then," she said. They sat there as the dark came in, and the stars appeared one by one, and the cattle settled for the night, and from inside the house they could hear Wesley reading aloud to himself from Robinson Crusoe, his voice gaining in confidence with every page, finding the rhythm of it. A boy learning that stories were a place you could live in while you figured out where else to go. The winter came early and hard that year, the way Colt had predicted the first snow, arriving in December and settling in with the intention of staying. Elara learned what a Texas winter meant, not the brutal cold of Philadelphia, not quite, but a different severity. The wind that found every gap in every wall, and the mornings when the pump in the kitchen took considerable effort before it would give water. She did not mind it. She had not minded the difficult things since the Ford. She thought perhaps she had never really minded them, that what she had mistaken for a preference for comfort was actually only the absence of anything worth being uncomfortable for. She had that now. She rode the circuit when the weather allowed it 3 settlements in a rough triangle centered on the broken spur children, who came from ranching families, and had the attentive eyes of children who spend most of their time outdoors and have learned to watch the world carefully. She taught them arithmetic and reading and some history, and the idea that there were books in the world that could take them further than their feet could carry them. They were good students. She found to her own surprise that she was a better teacher than she had been in Philadelphia, where she had been competent, but contained working within a system someone else had built. Out here, she was building it herself, which was harder and more satisfying than she had expected. The children were different from the ones she had taught in Philadelphia in ways that were not better or worse, but simply other. They were accustomed to silence and to distance. They did not fidget in the same ways. They had a different relationship to physical stillness, born of hours spent on horseback, or watching cattle, or waiting out weather. But they were hungry for the things she brought, not just the facts and skills, but the sense that the world was larger than what they could see from their doorsteps. A girl named Cecily, 9 years old, sat in the front row of every session, and afterward would ask questions so precise and so searching that Elara sometimes had to admit she did not know the answer, which Cecily accepted with perfect equanimity, and Elara found both humbling and invigorating. She thought about her father teaching. She thought about the school in Philadelphia, the particular smell of it, chalk and old wood, and the slight mustiness of books kept in a building that was never quite warm enough. She thought about the way her father had looked at his students, with the focused attention of a man who genuinely believed that each person in the room was capable of more than they had yet shown. She tried to look at her students the same way. She was not sure she always managed it, but she tried. She came home to the broken spur at the end of each circuit 2 or 3 days, out and back, and the first time she crested the final rise and saw the lights of the house below, and felt what she felt. She understood what her father had been trying to tell her in the last entry of his journal. About belonging, about the difference between a destination and a home, about the fact that understanding it required having arrived. Colt was always at the house when she came back, not waiting at the door. That was not his way, and she would not have wanted it to be. He would be doing something ordinary, checking harness in the barn, or sitting at the table with the account books, or out at the woodpile, and he would look up when she rode in, and something would ease in his face that told her the days she was gone had been longer for him than they were for her. She did not say so. She did not need to. Wesley was awarded a place at a school in San Antonio in the spring, a place Raines had arranged through a contact who owed him a favor. The school was practical. It taught surveying and basic law, and the kind of knowledge that allowed a person to make their way through the world with some independence. Wesley spent the weeks before he left helping Colt build a new section of fence on the south boundary, the two of them working side by side with the quiet efficiency of people who have found they fit well together in the work. The evening before he left, Wesley found Elara in the yard and stood beside her, looking at the sky going golden over the western hills. I want to be a lawyer, he said. Eventually, if I can manage it. She looked at him. He was taller than he had been in October, or perhaps she was simply used to seeing him now, in a way she hadn't been at the start. You can manage it, she said. You sound very certain. I've been a teacher long enough to know the difference between someone who wants something and someone who will have it. She held his gaze. You'll have it. He looked at the hills for a moment. I want to make it so what happened to your father, and to the other people Creed hurt. I want to make it harder for that to happen again. I want to be part of the thing that makes it harder. Then be that, she said. Your uncle's name was Creed. Your name is Wesley. You decide every day which one you are. He was quiet for a moment. Your father, he said. He decided the same thing I think. Every day. Yes, she said. He did. Wesley left the next morning, and the ranch was quieter without him, and also in some way more completely itself, the two of them, and Ira, and the cattle, and the work, and the long silences that were not empty. Spring came. The grass came back green, and then golden. The cattle had weathered the winter well, and the herd was healthy, and Colt talked about expanding, about adding a section of land to the east that was going up for sale, about the future of the ranch as something built to outlast the builder. He talked about it with her. Not to her. The difference was small, and it was everything. On a morning in April, she was sitting on the back step with a book, a new one that had come in on the supply run, a novel she had been meaning to read since November, when Colt came and sat beside her. He had coffee. He handed her a cup without being asked. She took it without looking up from the book. Elara, he said. She turned a page. Elara. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression that was as close to nervous as she had ever seen on him, which was to say, it was very nearly invisible, except that she knew exactly what to look for. His jaw was set in a particular way. His eyes were very direct. She waited. He looked at the yard. He looked at the pasture beyond it, the cattle moving slow and patient in the spring grass that had come back green after the hard winter. Greener than she had expected, almost startling after all those months of gray and brown. He looked at the hills at the far edge of the property, the ones that turned purple at dusk, the ones she had come to think of as marking the edge of the world she had chosen. He looked at her. I built that room in November, he said. I know. I didn't explain it. No. I should have. He set his coffee cup down carefully on the step between them. I built it because I was thinking about the future, about what the future might look like, and the version I kept coming back to. He paused. You were in it, every version. You were always in it. She set the book down on her knee. I know this isn't how you do things in Philadelphia, he said. I know this isn't a speech or a ceremony or anything organized and proper. I'm not... He stopped. He pressed his lips together. I'm not a man who has the words, but I have this. He gestured a small movement that seemed to take in the ranch, the hills, the spring morning, everything around them. And I want you to have it too. I want you to be here, not as a guest, not as someone I'm protecting, as yours, she said quietly. He looked at her. And you as mine, she added. A silence, the kind that had weight in it, that meant something that both of them understood. Are you asking me? She said. He looked at her for a long moment, and then something shifted in his face. The particular thing that happened in his face when he stopped managing what was there and let it simply be there, and he said, I think I just asked you. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took the morning light to move 1 inch each across the floorboards of the step where they were sitting. Then I think I just said yes, she said. He reached out and put his hand over hers, the way he had on the night before the ford, covering it, keeping it warm. She turned her hand over and held his. The spring morning continued around them. The cattle moved in the pasture. Rex came around the side of the house and looked at them sitting together on the step, and wagged his tail once, and went to lie in the sun near the barn door, satisfied with the state of things. The cottonwood at the edge of the south pasture had leafed out overnight, or so it seemed one day bare, and the next full of small new leaves that moved in the light wind with a sound like distant water. She thought about her father. She thought about what he had written in his last entry, and what it had cost him to write it, and what it had cost her not to read it for 3 years, and what it had given her finally to read it here in this place with this man. She thought that he had known in the particular way he knew things that she would find her way. He had believed it when she had not been able to believe it herself. He had written it down so she would have the evidence. Look for someone to trust. She was looking at him. "Colt," she said. "Yes. My father was right about you." He was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly he said, "I hope so." She leaned her head against his shoulder and looked out at the morning and the hills and the spring that had come back the way it always came back, indifferent to everything that had happened in the winter, and full of its own particular insistence that things were beginning again. That was all. That was everything. They sat there for a long time until the work called them up from the step, and they went back to it together. And the day unfolded the way days do, when you are no longer waiting for the life you are supposed to be living, but are already inside. One ordinary moment at a time, each one exactly sufficient, each one its own small and complete thing. The broken spur in spring, the cattle and the fence and the long grass and the enormous sky. Circuit teaching on Tuesdays and Thursdays children who asked questions she could not always answer. Letters from Wesley, growing longer and more confident as the months passed. The handwriting of a boy, becoming the handwriting of someone who believed what he put on paper mattered. Letters to Wesley from Ilara, full of the things a good teacher says to a good student. You are capable of more than you know. The work is worth doing. Trust the person you are becoming. And in the evenings, the porch. The two of them. The stars coming on. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was as her father had promised her it would be everything.